Good day, everyone. I hope you are all doing well today. In this lesson, we will tackle how to construct hypotheses on our research, the importance of independent and independent variables, and lastly, we will also talk about the validity and reliability in our study. Now, let's get started. First, let's talk about hypothesis. Hypothesis is the thesis or the main idea of an experiment. It is the statement about predicted relationship between at least two variables. Research hypothesis is designed to fit the type of research design that has been selected. Some non-scientific synonyms of hypothesis are called speculations, guess, or hunch. Now, iba ang hypothesis natin sa experimental and sa non-experimental research design. Because in non-experimental research design, we cannot predict the relationship of two variables dahil hindi naman natin naalamin sa non-experimental ang cause and effect ng variables natin, di ba? Kaya non-experimental hypothesis is a statement of your predictions of how events, traits, behaviors might be related. Some non-experimental designs, particularly those that do not restrict subjects' responses, do not typically include a hypothesis, tulad ng phenomenology, case studies, naturalistic observation, and qualitative studies, because you are intended to explore and describe behaviors as they naturally occur. Kaya mahihirapan tayo na mag-take ng prediction about behaviors or events that might or might not occur. Now let's talk about the characteristics of an experimental hypothesis. First, our hypothesis must have a synthetic statement. Synthetic statements are those that can be either true or false. Second, our experimental hypothesis must also be testable. Manipulating and measuring the result of our experiment should be possible. Third, statement of research hypothesis must be falsifiable or disapprovable by the research findings. One of the possible outcomes of the design experiment must be an answer that, if obtained, would disprove the hypothesis. And lastly, our hypothesis should be parsimonious. Natatandaan mo niyo pa ba ang meaning ng parsimonious or parsimony? It just means na dapat ang hypothesis natin ay mabilis maintindihan. Simplest explanation is preferred. Now, paano naman tayo magko-construct ng effective na hypothesis? First, we must ask a question or state a problem. Writing a hypothesis begins with a research question that you want to answer. Ano ba ang question na gusto mong sagutin sa research mo? It could be, does having an alcoholic parent affect a child's academic performance? And once you have a question that you want to answer, you must now do a preliminary research. You must look for theories and previous studies to help you form uneducated assumptions about what your research will find. You will need to back up your hypothesis with previous studies or even theories to form an educated assumption. And in our case, we found a study entitled Parental Alcohol Related Disorders and School Performance in 16 Years Old, a Swedish national cohort study. And it was published by researchers Berg, Back, Winnerlung, and Here. And in their study, they found out that in Sweden, alcohol related disorders in both mothers and fathers are associated with lower school performance in their children at age 15 to 16 years old. Now, I can say na with my gathered data, I can assume na there is indeed a relationship between alcoholic parent and academic performance. Pero of course, pwede pa rin ako mag-search ng iba pang study na makakapag-back up nito. Next step is to formulate a hypothesis. With all your gathered data, you should have some idea of what you'll expect to find. Therefore, you may now start to construct a hypothesis. And be sure that your hypothesis includes the following: relevant variables such as IV and DV, the specific group being studied, your aim and objective of your study. And in our case, we have an independent variable of alcoholic parents and dependent variable of academic performance. And yung group na gusto nating i-study ay senior high school sa Lucban, Quezon, since their town is famously known for lambanog. And our aim is to know if having an alcoholic parent would affect the academic performance of the child. Now, next step, we can praise our hypothesis. There are actually two types of hypothesis: alternative and null hypothesis. With alternative, it always states that there is a statistically significant relationship between two variables, whereas sa null naman, It states that there is no statistically significant relationship between two variables. Our alternative hypothesis will depend on our objective. We have if then or cause effect and difference, and we also have correlation. Ang cause effect, ito yung sinasabi na si IV ay may effect kay DV. Like in our case, we can hypothesize that having an alcoholic parent affects the academic performance of senior high school students in Lucban, Quezon. We can make use of the words such as effect, impact, change, and influence in our hypothesis. Ang hypothesis natin ay non-directional. Kapag sinabi naman natin correlation, gusto lang natin i-describe ang relationship between variables and to measure the strength of their relationship. We have positive and negative relationship. When we say positive relationship, IV and DV both moves in the same direction. Pwedeng both sila ay mag-increase or mag-decrease. Basta, same direction. For example, can studying longer make a student's grade higher? And then let's say that I did my research and I found that if a person spends more time with reading and studying, there is a high tendency that they can be one of the honor rolls. Therefore, I hypothesize that there is a positive correlation between time spent on studying and academic grades among students of LSPU. And when we say negative relationship, IV and DV move in the opposite direction. Pwedeng si IV ay tumaas habang si DV ay bumaba. Or it can also be vice versa. For example, I want to know what effect does daily use of social media have on the attention span of people. And then let's say I did my research and found out that some studies claims that the more you spend time on social media, the less attention span you will have. Therefore, I hypothesize that there is a negative correlation between time spent on social media and attention span of students in LCU. With correlation, we can make use of the words such as increase or decrease, higher and lower, more or less, better or worse. And if you are comparing two groups, the hypothesis can state what difference you expect to find between them. For example, you wanted to know the difference between the academic performance of students who chose modular and synchronous mode of learning. Now, your hypothesis could be students who chose synchronous mode of learning performed academically better than those who chose modular. And lastly, class, if our research involves statistical hypothesis testing, we will also have to write a null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is the default position that there is no association between the variables. And since our research would require you to have a statistical treatment, you will need to include a null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is written as HO, while the alternative hypothesis is H1 or HA. And sa case natin tungkol sa alcoholic parent, our null hypothesis will be having an alcoholic parent has no effect on the academic performance on senior high school students in Lucban, Quezon. In the simplest experiments, an experimental hypothesis states a potential relationship between two variables, and those are independent and dependent variables. An experimenter's independent variable is the dimension that the experimenter intentionally manipulates. Katulad ng sinabi ko sa inyo guys, ito yung binibigay nating intervention or treatment sa ating participants. Tayo ang magko-control dito at magmamanipulate. In an experimental research, IV must be given at least two possible